I had gone on a trip of a lifetime, really, to Africa, and was in Namibia with a friend when we had a car accident. And so I'm T8 paraplegic complete. I've travelled all over the world since my injury. I've been to lots of places that you would think wouldn't be accessible. I've been back to India.
Have you?
I've been all around Europe. I've been to Australia. We've just come back from Cyprus. And yes, I think it is all doable. I have found that in order to do the things I want to do, I've had to accept that sometimes I need help. You are in control of what happens to you and your chair and your body and but if you need help, then that's okay. Slow down. Stop assuming that you know everything now. Don't, just give yourself time, because things will be different. Things will change. Things will become more possible. They may not look possible now. And they're bound to not, that's normal. But things will change. Give yourself time.
Welcome to the Back Up and Thriving Accessible Travel Podcast. I'm your host, Sophie Elwes, and in this series I'll be interviewing a range of guests who are all affected by spinal cord injury. They'll be sharing their travel stories, experiences, and some fabulous advice. Our hope is that listeners will realise that travelling after spinal cord injury is not only possible, but that it can be life-changing too. Claire, lovely to see you. Thank you so much for joining us on the Backup Podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Great. Could you start by introducing yourself, please, and sharing a little bit about your journey and perhaps how it intersects with Backup?
Yes, of course. So my name is Clair Pollard, and I'm 51. I'm hesitating because I can never remember quite how old I am. And I had my spinal injury when I was 25. So just gone past that point of being longer in living in a wheelchair than being able-bodied. So my injury was in 1999 when I was traveling in Africa. So I had gone on a trip of a lifetime, really, to Africa, and was in Namibia with a friend when we had a car accident. And so I'm T8 paraplegic complete. And my journey with Backup started pretty much straight away, actually. So I found out about Backup when I was in Stoke Mandeville. So I was in Stoke Mandeville for about 6 months, which was typical for length of rehab in those days. It's not so true now, but in those days it was about 6 months. And while I was there, I had been a keen skier before my accident, and a friend of mine, a very lovely friend, was looking for inspiration or things to make me feel more positive and things that might cheer me up. And she came across Backup, because at that time, I guess Backup was primarily known for skiing and getting people skiing. And so she sent me all of this information, which I was quite excited by, but couldn't really imagine that I would ever be able to do anything like skiing. But I got in contact with Backup and spoke to the now legendary Emma Rainish, who at the time was the course coordinator at Backup. So Backup in those days had 3 members of staff. That's how tiny it was. And operated from someone's spare bedroom. It was a very, very tiny thing back then. And Emma immediately signed me up for a multi-activity course almost as soon as, I think my memory is that I'd been out of hospital a few weeks, but I suspect it was longer than that, but it felt like that. And I went off and did a Calvert course in the Lake District, which was, like so many people say, sort of life-changing and life-saving, really, in lots of ways. I mean, I think I was coping and I was very motivated to get back to work. I was training to be a clinical psychologist when I had my injury, and I knew that I could still do that. And I was always very determined. I had loads of support from wonderful people who convinced me that I could still do what I wanted to do. And But I think I didn't ever think life would be quite what I wanted it to be. I think I always sort of thought, this is going to be a lesser life. It's going to be harder. It's going to be, it's just I'm not going to have all the things in life that I think I would like or I would have had previously. And that course honestly changed that. I met a group of sort of like-minded people who convinced me that, I think convinced me that I was still me. I met people and had fun and people liked me and, we had a giggle and we got drunk and fell out of our chairs and had fun and just, had a wonderful time. Not that Backup advocates everyone falling out of their chairs, obviously. But it was, it just showed me much more than the activities. The activities were fun and were great, but for me it was the social side. It was meeting people and still being me, 25 years old, who people would like and who I could have fun with and make friends. And I think I came back from that course with a whole new renewed sort of, I can do this. I'm going to be all right. This is okay. I'm still the same person. I learned that I didn't have to be the best at wheelchair skills. I didn't have to be the best at, I could do things and just be me. I didn't have to be an athlete. I didn't have to be, I could just get on with my life. And I'd actually already gone back to work, because I went back to work while I was still in hospital, which with hindsight was a bit early, but so I started going back to college while I was, and commuting from Stoke Mandeville.
Whoa, no way. My gosh.
Yeah, which was interesting. But I sort of, I think it just helped me to feel much more empowered, much more able to ask for what I needed at work, much more able to say, I can still be just as good as everybody else. Because I think I'd got a sort of a sense that I think a lot of people from sort of minoritized groups talk about, where you feel you've got to be twice as good as everyone else in order to be accepted. And I suppose I've still throughout my life had a little bit of that, but far less. I think Backup really helped me to think I can just be me and that's going to be enough and that's going to be okay. And so following that course, I then, suddenly had a whole new group of friends that, really got it and really understood it. And that whole sort of social support network has been so valuable through my whole life. And you'll know this, that, and still today, although I don't see some of my friends from Backup perhaps often as I used to, they are still some of the most important people in my life. And when I really need support, they are the people that I turn to because they get it. And they just, and you know what it's like when you talk to another woman who uses a chair. It's like, actually, you need that sometimes. You just kind of need that support.
Mm.
And so I went skiing finally with Backup in, I think, about 2001. And was dreadful at it, but loved it. Never got quite back to where I was before because I was quite a good skier before my injury. But I just had fun and had a great time. And it was just this life affirming, support. And then following that, I stayed involved. So I group led on a lot of courses, actually, while I was single and had lots of time. I did a course, I think, every summer for quite a long time. I group led lots of Calvert courses. I did the City Skills course. I group led the first ever 13-17 course.
Did you?
Which was fabulous. And coming full circle, my little girl went on her first course this summer as a buddy, which was just amazing.
Okay.
So it's whole Backup journey. And I also sat on the board of trustees for, I think about 15 years. It was quite a long time, and was the chair of trustees for a while. And just loved being involved in that side of Backup. So getting involved, and I suppose bringing in my professional life. So what I did, I've now had a nearly 30-year career in the NHS. So bringing in what I do at work into Backup and helping Backup think about the NHS and how we now have statutory funding for some of our services that comes through the NHS. So, all those sorts of things, I really enjoyed being involved in those discussions and the development and just watching Backup grow has been amazing. I mean, I don't know how many full-time staff you've got now.
Pushing 75, I think, something like that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, it's amazing. And then of course the thing that I suppose I'm
full-time staff, I should say, not full-time. 75
but staff.
total.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's just incredible how it's grown, and the turnover and the things that you've done and the services that have been offered. And, you know, I like to think that I've been part of that growth, and that's been amazing. And, you know, I remember having conversations on the board very early on about when we decided to change our articles slightly so that we were there for everyone affected by spinal cord injury, not just the person with the injury. And so the big debate and the big discussions around family and getting family members support, and just being really passionate that that was what we should do and it was the right direction to take. And, you know, there were arguments backwards and forwards about that, but it was just, it was. And to look now at the difference that's made in terms of the services that are offered, it's just phenomenal.
I mean, looking at the family team now, it's vast. We've just had 3 new staff members. It's, you know, it's one of the biggest, by far one of the biggest teams there is at Backup. It's massive. Yeah.
And I've always been a massive believer in that actually a spinal cord injury does not just happen to an individual. It happens to a system. It happens to the people around them. And sometimes the people around them are affected almost more than the person themselves. If you think about the levels of things like post-traumatic stress disorder in family members, it's enormous. And I'm convinced that we cannot fully help the person with the injury if we're not working with their system and we're not helping the people around them. And as you know, sometimes we don't need to work with the individual themselves much at all. We might do more for them by working with their partner or their parent or their, you know, and particularly for young people, actually, if we work with their parents and we convince their parents that what this person's life could be like, we don't need to work with the young person, although we do. So I, you know, remain convinced that that's absolutely where we should be putting our energy and into doing those things. And also, I think the other big thing that Backup do so well, which I've actually taken back a lot into my own professional life, is the peer support element that I think is so strong and it runs through everything Backup does and is so important and has a big resonance in my professional life in mental health. And peer support is a real stalwart of what we do. You know, it underlines a lot of the work we do. I think it's developing more and more in the NHS. I think we could still learn a lot from the way Backup do it. But it's so valuable and adds so much to someone's experience and someone's recovery. And of course, that was what led to the development of the mentoring, well, what was called at the time the mentoring project, although it's very much not a project anymore. It's very much an established service. But so the thinking behind mentoring was that I suppose shortly after doing lots of Backup courses, there was that thing that we always recognised where you had this amazing experience of a Backup course, and then you came home into your real life, and we would often find that people got quite low following a course, or quite sort of, you know, and we also found that group leaders were doing quite a lot of support with people because they went back into their life and they realised that actually the world isn't designed for me and not everybody is going to get it, and I missed that level of camaraderie and the support that I had on the course. And what we thought was, actually, this is about peer support. It's about extending that peer support bit, but very much doing that with some of the psychological models of recovery in mind. So thinking about how we inform what we offer, how we tailor it, how we make sure that we look after the mentors, we look after the people that are delivering this support. And I suppose how we tailor it very specifically to the individual. So the thing that I think is key in mentoring that is different from a lot of other sort of peer support schemes is that we match people quite carefully, as you know, and we've always done this since the beginning, that we think about level of injury, we think about gender, sort of social circumstances, what someone's looking for, what their goals are, and then we match them with someone who can understand their particular circumstances and can talk to them about that.
Mm.
And so I think it must be 20 something years now that we've been running mentoring. You might know better than me, but it's, yeah. And I wrote the training program with my very good friend Joe, who I met through Backup, who was an assistant psychologist when we met and went on sort of just a year behind me to train as a clinical psychologist herself. And the two of us wrote the training program over a marathon 6-hour phone call where we just wrote this thing on the phone, because we didn't like, nothing was online then either. So we did it together, wrote this program, came up with the ideas for it, typed it all up, and then ran a weekend. And it was just sort of, yeah, as straightforward as that, really. And we then just didn't look back. And I mean, at the time, it was supported in the office by the lovely Eric, who left a long time ago, who you may not even have met, but who did, I think, 2 days a week mentoring, and then the rest was something else. But we managed to convince Backup to give us him for 2 days a week. And it's just grown and grown and grown there. And the thing that I am most proud of and that I really love, and which you've seen me burst into tears over at training weekends, is when people come now to train as mentors and say, I was mentored when I was first injured and it made such a difference to my life that I want to give something back, and I want to come and that sort of progression and that thing of that being part of your journey is, it just, I mean, it blows me away that that's been so successful. It's just been great.
I will always be, you know, my kind of journey work-wise started really in mentoring, and I will always be, you know, flying that flag for that kind of the connection, you know, that peer support, but that kind of, what I loved about it was making those matches and, you know, making it on the basis of age and level of injury, but it's having that conversation and, you know, finding out someone, oh, he's a Liverpool fan. And I've got a mentor who's, okay, he's a Man U fan, but, you know, I think they might kind of get on, sort of thing. And, you know, it doesn't always work, but it does, you know, when it does, it's just magic. It's pure magic. It was just such a joy doing that. I loved it.
Yeah, no, and I mean, it's just wonderful. And I think the kind of when two people click and manage to support each other in that way. And what I really love is that the mentors will tell you they get as much from it as the mentees. And I think that is amazing. And, you know, we train mentors that have not been injured that long sometimes. You know, they're still very much at the start of their own journey. And the idea that they can help someone along, and this, I mean, you probably know this, but there's lots of scientific evidence about the benefits of volunteering and the benefits to your own mental health of you giving your time. It's something I try and get patients to think about all the time when it's right for them to think about volunteering, because I think it gives so much back to you to give your time and do something for someone else in that way. And I think, you know, watching the mentors get as much from it as the people that they're working with. And they give, you know, that so many people give so much time. I mean, as you know, all backup services run on people giving their time for free. And I, you know, I've always given, you know, we do 2 or 3 weekends a year training people, we do supervision, you know, and actually I still get so much from doing that. And you know, I'm about to do one this weekend, and I know that on Friday afternoon I'll be tired and I'll have done a full week at work and I'll think, oh, can I do another 2 days? And I know that come 4:00 on Sunday afternoon, I'll have more energy than when I started on Friday evening because it energizes me to do that stuff. So, And then and over the years we've had more people join. So we've had another clinical psychologist who I trained with, Ali, who joined us more or less at the beginning and has been involved ever since. And so Ali, Joe and I have run the training courses between us. And obviously we've had loads of brilliant staff and backup, including yourself over the years who've been in the mentoring team. And I think about, I can't remember how long after we started Spinal Injured Mentored, we then did the family mentoring. And that was incredible. I mean, the first family weekend we did, all of us were there because we were everybody wanted to be there. We just wanted to be part of this new development in it. And that was amazing. I mean, that was very emotional. I remember the first family weekend really being blown away by how painful some of the things that we were talking about were, because very often families had no support. So the person with the injury, generally the people coming as mentors are quite a long, they're on their journey. They've had quite a lot of support. Hopefully they've gone through a lot of things. They've talked about what happened to them quite a lot. We find that family mentors haven't always, and the ones that haven't been offered mentoring, which of course is less and less now, really, that level of peer support that you see on the training weekends, the first one of those, we were quite amazed, I think, by the level of emotion and just how difficult some of it was, and some of the really hard conversations that people had, but needed to have, and how valuable that was, and the difference it made. So
that makes me think of the lounge, actually, and the family lounge, which happens once a fortnight. I've been in there a few times, and it is the most moving space. It can be really heavy, but there are a lot of attendees that are there kind of regularly and there to support each other, and new people coming in, and this is their first kind of, entry into getting any support for them, and it's a really powerful space. That
absolutely. And I think that's what's needed, and the space, and I think it also shows what a safe space it feels for people to be able to show that level of trauma and emotion, and to be able to share it and feel safe to do so, and feel understood and heard. I mean, you just can't put a price on that offer for people, and how much people need it. And I remember, my mum, for example, talking to other mums who've been through something like this. And I remember she read an article that somebody had written on one of Backup's communications about having a daughter with a spinal cord injury, and just being really amazed by someone gets it, someone understands what this feels like. And, and the sort of and being able to hold, I think Backup do this really well, holding two perspectives at once, which is, on the one hand, being able to really join someone in how awful it is, and how black everything feels, and just how hard it feels at that time. And at the same time, hold in mind hope and the idea that this can be better and isn't impossible, and life isn't over. And I think holding those two perspectives at once is what's important, because so much when you get is one or the other. So you either get people who are very kind of, oh my goodness, your life is over, I can't think of anything worse, how terrible, I feel so sorry for you. That real sort of pity stuff that you get, and that you still recognise, don't you? I mean, I see it in people's faces sometimes, and I just want to, react badly. But I think, so you either get that, or you get the very, you can be a Paralympian and everything's wonderful and it's all great. And actually neither of those perspectives is really helpful to someone, and are not real. That's not the reality. We know that living with a spinal cord injury is not easy. It's hard, and there are going to be really difficult times. There are going to be things that people are either not going to be able to do, or at least have to do differently. Life is tough, and we shouldn't shy away from that. But at the same time, being able to say, but even given all of that, there are possibilities, and life can be good again. I think just those things are something that Backup does really well.
We have a growing family outreach service, and family members make up a big part of our audience, and hopefully there are a number of them listening to this. I wonder, with all your experience, a Backup and living with a spinal cord injury, it's quite broad, but do you have some advice or some words of kind of wisdom for those listening who fall into that category?
So I think the thing that I always want to say to family members is, it's okay for this to be a problem for you too. And you need to look after yourselves in order to look after the person with the injury, because I I meet a lot of family members, particularly parents, but partners too, and other things who don't put themselves first, who always think, no, it's about them, it's about their injury. But I think you have to remember this has happened to you too. This has impacted your life too. It's hard. And I've seen my family go through that, and I've worked with, umpteen families where I see this. So I think that's the thing is, there's that whole cliche about, put your own oxygen mask on first. I think it's really important for carers. The level of mental health issues in carers is enormous. And I know quite often people don't use the word carer in spinal cord injury. My husband doesn't like it, for example, although he very much is my carer at times. But I think it is, you need to look after yourself, and it's okay for you to be traumatized and depressed and sad and anxious about what's happened. That is normal and is okay. And I think sometimes families need that permission to feel that. So hopefully, maybe I can give that permission to somebody.
Yeah, love that. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Speaking of possibilities, the theme of this podcast is about travel. And I think, I think for a lot of people in those early stages, especially with news stories out there and things like that, which is, telling them that actually, it's not a good idea, it's not possible or whatever. You've just come back from holiday. Were you a keen, you were in Namibia but when you had your injury. Were you a keen traveller before you had your injury?
Yeah, absolutely. I travelled a lot. Yeah. So any chance that I had travelled. So I took a gap year after I left school, and went and worked in Australia and backpacked around Australia for a while. And then I went to India and Nepal. And just had the most amazing time, and would take any opportunity I could to go travelling, and which was why I was in Africa with my best friend, who is still my best friend and forgave me for nearly killing us in the car accident that we had. But she was also a really keen traveller, and so we were, any opportunity we got. And of course, when you're first injured, it does definitely feel like that's not going to be possible anymore. How is it going to work? But again, I think I had a lot of really great mentors. I had lots of people at Backup who said, no, don't be daft. This is fine. You can do it. It's okay. It's different. You need to plan more. And I think that is the thing that, you probably do lose some of the spontaneity. Not that you can't be spontaneous, but I think you probably, just need to be a bit more sensible about where you're going to stay and where you're going to sleep and what's going to happen. But, actually there isn't any, I've travelled all over the world since my injury. I've been to lots of places that you would think wouldn't be accessible. I've been back to India.
Have you?
I've been all around Europe. I've been to Australia. We've just come back from Cyprus. And yes, I think it is all doable. I suppose my learning for me, and everyone is different and everybody will approach things differently. I have found that in order to do the things I want to do, I've had to accept that sometimes I need help. So, not when I'm in my environment in London, I don't very often need a lot of help. I'm pretty independent. I get most places on my own. I don't really have to ask for help very often. When I have been travelling, there have been times when I've needed to accept help. So, when I was in India, which incidentally was a trip that I met my husband on, I wanted to see inside a temple, but the temple was up, a flight of 100 stairs. So if I was going to get up there, somebody needed to carry me. It was kind of, and I was all right with that. I would rather, I wasn't going to sit at the bottom of the stairs. I was going to go into the temple. So therefore I needed to be carried. But I think you have to trust people. You have to put your trust in people. You have to be sensible, obviously, and you need to be in control. And I think that's always a message that something that I learned at Backup, and that I think we teach very well, is that verbal independence idea that, you are in control of what happens to you and your chair and your body and but if you need help, then that's okay. And I think that's a personal choice. There are some people who wouldn't choose to be carried up a flight of stairs, but for me, I wanted to see what was at the top of the stairs. It's sort of. So I think that's important, is being prepared to ask for help, but being in control and I suppose you do need to be assertive and be able to say, this is what I need.
I think even more so when you're in a different country and there's a language barrier and, you need to be really clear, right?
You do, and it's not always easy. That's not an easy thing to do, and I think you probably need support sometimes with that. And, I know I've had loads of great support from people, but I've had to be clear with those people about what help I need but I think it's all doable. And sometimes you have to put up with some indignities, and sometimes you have to, I remember when we were in India showering in a tent with a bucket of cold water, basically, and I had to put up with being a bit stinky to be honest, for a few days because there wasn't a proper shower and it was too cold. And, you do have to put up with indignities. You might have to, compromise with how you go to the loo, for example. You might have to sort of, but I think you choose what is comfortable for you. And if you are willing to be flexible and, and I think a sense of humour helps. You have to be able to laugh sometimes. And, but I do think there's a level of acceptance as well, and accepting that the world isn't accessible. And to be honest, also doesn't owe you accessibility. I mean, it's sort of, we have to sort of accept that there are lots of places in the world where making things wheelchair accessible for us is not the first priority of that population, particularly if you go to countries that are poorer or, it's sort of, and I think you sort of have to, well, my personal view is that you make the best of it. And what I've always found is that generally people are generally really helpful. I mean, I know that that's not everyone's experience, but it's certainly been mine. And I think if you approach things in the right way and you're positive and you're friendly and you're polite, then actually it gets you a long way. And I remember one of the first trips I did was to Miami with a friend of mine. And mostly the States is pretty accessible, but Miami, it's accessible, but if you have money, it's accessible if you can stay in a fancy hotel. And we had no money and were staying in a backpackers hostel, which was not accessible. But within half an hour of me being there, they'd built a ramp up to the dorm that we were staying in, and they'd sorted it, and I think that was because we went in and we were nice and we made, we were polite and we were nice and and people wanted to help and they did. And we had the most phenomenal trip. And yeah, it's kind of, and I think there are some, I suppose with my traveling, I've interspersed places that are really not accessible and are quite tricky, with then every so often giving myself a real break and going to America or going to somewhere where I know that things will be catered for and there's a service culture and there's, there are disabled toilets everywhere. And I think that helps. But actually then you find access in the most surprising places. I don't know whether you found your travels, but I've been to some places that I really didn't expect, tiny little villages that I didn't expect to be accessible. And suddenly you find there's a disabled toilet and, there's a ramp. I mean, it might be a ramp that's ridiculously steep, but, there's sort of something. Yeah. So, yeah, I think anything is possible if you are willing to compromise and be flexible.
Totally. I mean, what would you say, I think, we spoke before about, that there are people who are newly injured and who are, they're scared. They don't want to do that. They've heard one bad story about someone's wheelchair getting wrecked. They don't want to do it. They've made that decision. What would your message be to them be?
So I think take it slowly. Do things within your comfort zone, one bit at a time, but challenge yourself. And I think you have to ask yourself, I mean, yes, things go wrong. And people's chairs do get damaged. I have to say mine's never been damaged badly. I got some scratches this time, but I've never had a real problem, touch wood. I think that you have to ask yourself, what is the price that I'm prepared to pay? And if I'm, am I prepared to never travel again? Am I prepared to give up the life that I, wanted to do? Because that's a choice. You don't have to do it. Nobody's going to make you get on a plane. Nobody's going to make you travel. But I think most people, eventually come to the conclusion that actually I don't want to not do this. I want to try. And I think then it's about talking to people, getting advice. There's loads of advice. Have some mentoring, get someone to talk to you about their experiences. Because there are ways to do it. And yes, it's hard and things do go wrong and there are problems, but actually that's not most people's experience. And, I have to say, I have taken hundreds and hundreds of flights since I've been in a chair and I've never had a massive problem. I've had a few indignities. I've had to argue with a few people about, no, I can't get out of my chair and walk through a scanner and things like that. But, generally it's you can do it. You need, but I think the other thing is get support, get help. Talk to people who've done it. Don't be afraid to ask questions and don't be afraid to be nervous because that's the most normal feeling in the world. And it's very easy for someone like me who's done this for 26 years to say, oh, just do it. Actually, of course, when you're first, it's daunting and it's scary. I would suggest do a short trip to start with. My first trip was with my family and we went to Menorca. And it was a shortish flight and we had a fully wheelchair accessible villa that we paid a lot of money for to make sure that it was okay. But go somewhere in the UK the first time you do it. There are lots of really lovely accessible accommodation places around the UK. Do something like that. If you don't want to get on a plane, go and get on Eurostar, do something, but try. So I think building up slowly and then, sometimes you need things to go a bit wrong. You need to have a problem or a hitch and you need to have the experience of overcoming it and it being okay. And I've had some fairly drastic things, including a rather embarrassing incident in a plane toilet which I won't go into details, but, when I was traveling one of the first times. And, those things are horrible at the time and you think, oh, this is awful, but you survive it and you get through it. And then, I can do this. And I think it is those slow incremental when you build up and you realize I can do this. And then you build on the next thing. And after a while, you look back and you think, actually, there's pretty much nothing I don't think I couldn't have because I've done it. And actually, if I got through that, then I'll get through the next thing. Yeah.
I think, with all those experiences that you're talking about and with time, you find little tricks and hacks. And, for me, there'll be things that I just kind of always do as standard and I know it works. Have you got any kind of hacks or tricks to share with us? Maybe about traveling by plane. I think that's one people are keen to hear.
I suppose a few things. One of the things I always do, and this doesn't work for everyone, but one of the things I find difficult in a plane is that I get quite a lot of neuropathic pain. And so if I'm stuck in one position for a long time, I get quite uncomfortable. And I have discovered a few years ago the joy of a TENS machine, which is absolutely amazing. And I swear by it for a long trip in terms of pain management. Doesn't work for everybody. It's one of those things that some people find really helpful. But that I never fly without the TENS machine because I think it's great. So I think things like that, I try and you always get put in the window seat, but I think actually that's okay because it means you're not got people climbing over you and kind of, trying to think if there's other things. I think I always make sure that the last thing I say when they put me on the thing is I look the person who is handling my chair in the eye specifically, and I say, you will look after it, won't you? And they always do. And I do think, I'm not saying it would have, but I do think it makes a difference if you humanize it and you say to someone, these are my legs. I'm anxious about this. Please look after it. And every time they look at me and go, yeah, I will, I'm going to take it right now. And they tell me, and I think it just sort of, it's things like that. I always make sure I ask before we land. I say to someone, can you make sure my chair is there once we land? Just so that it's at the forefront of someone's mind. So again, I think those sort of being assertive appropriately, being really nice about it and being really but I think, that's helpful. And I think it makes me feel better. I also always have an AirTag on my chair.
Yeah.
latterly, because I think if it does disappear off somewhere, then at least I know where it is and I can track it. So I have an AirTag on the bottom of my chair, which I've never had to use, fortunately. But and things are a lot better. I mean, I remember having a few rows over the years when I used to fly, when they wouldn't bring your chair to the aircraft door and they'd want to load you into another wheelchair and push you to the baggage hall. And I remember one incident in particular refusing to get off the plane until they went and got my chair, and they were furious with me, absolutely furious. And I just refused. I said, I'm not getting off this. I'm not getting in another chair. I'd had it. I was like, I'm not going to do that. The indignity, the pain it will cause, the risk to my skin. I'm just not doing it. And they did. They went and got my chair. I mean, they weren't happy about it, but they did it. So, I think there's something about, and again, I think I look back now and think, well, I weathered that, that I got through that. So, I can manage most things, I think.
Big time. Speaking of kind of weathering things and going through life, looking back to your newly injured self, if you were to tell her one thing at this point, what would that be?
There's a phrase that I use a lot at work, and you've heard me say this before, but I use it all the time in people I work with, which is that thoughts are not facts. And I think the beauty of that is to remember that what your head is telling you in the midst of something, when something is really bad and really awful, isn't necessarily the way it's always going to be. And it's not necessarily right. And so I think I would probably have said to myself, slow down, stop assuming that you know everything now. Don't, just give yourself time, because things will be different, things will change, things will become more possible. They may not look possible now, and they're bound to not, that's normal. But things will change. Give yourself time. So yeah, I think that thing about, don't buy into the negative stories in your head too much. And remember that not everything that you think and feel right now is exactly right and is always going to be true. So yeah, I think that's probably.
I love that. It's such good advice. Love it. I'm gonna ask you a question that we ask all of our guests, which is, what is your advice for those listening for living well with a spinal cord injury?
Gosh, so I think in some ways what I've just said, don't buy into the negative stories in your head or in society about disability. Carve your own way. But also use your social support, talk to other people, let people help you. Ask for help. You won't do this on your own. You will need support. You will need people around you, and it doesn't matter who they are. That's your choice, as whatever. But I think, remember that other people are your biggest support, and not necessarily even physically or practically, but emotionally. Just lean on other people, learn from other people, and I think that's really important, and just. The other thing is, I think it's an investment in terms of looking after your health. You will not regret it if you with a spinal cord injury. I mean, it's true for everybody, right? We only have one body and we have to take care of it. But I think particularly if you're living with a disability, you need to take care of both your physical and mental health in a way that is more important than for other people. Your body can't take risks in the same way as other people. So, I think those things are important. What we're taught in rehab, the advice that we're given, we need to listen to it. We need to look after our skin. We need to look after our bladders and bowels and eat well and all those sorts of things. And then I think, looking after your mental health, making sure that you're talking to people, making sure that you are, emotionally nourishing what yourself and what you need.
Claire, thank you so much. This has been a beautiful conversation. I've absolutely loved it.
Thank you, Sophie. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.